I went to college in Seattle in the early 2000s. I'd gotten a fair number of scholarships, so I wasn't too worried about the cost of school itself. But the price of textbooks was a lot more than I'd planned. This led me to start looking for a job. I'd never had a real job before, so it took a few interviews to secure a position. My resume was a little thin at that point. I landed a gig as a barista at a coffee shop a couple blocks from the waterfront, kind of near the ferry. It was almost in Pike Place Market, but not one of the cool spots that got a lot of traffic. The shop was on the bottom level of a building that housed a number of businesses. There was a print shop on the other corner on our same street level, and on the floors above were offices and a couple apartments at the very top level. I think the offices were for some sports company and a boating company that operated nearby, but had overgrown their building right on the water. That's what I gathered, at least, after working there for a few months. It was January. I'd come back early from winter break to pick up a couple of shifts, and honestly, to escape extended family that had invaded my parents' house. I guess the timing doesn't really matter that much, except to tell you that it was winter. It was me and one other barista closing up the shop after an incredibly boring day. I think we had maybe 10 or 15 customers across my 6-hour shift. Anna Marie, the other barista, was counting the till. She was the shift manager and so handled the money at the end of the day and had to walk it down the block to do the night deposit. I wiped down the half-dozen tables and stacked the chairs, mopped like usual, restocked the beans, made each of us a final coffee for the road. Split and bagged up the scones that were left over for Anna Marie and I to take home. Really, the best perk of the closing shift. I bagged up the trash cans, which was easy since we'd had so few customers. Took those out to the back alley, propping the door open with a spare crate. It looked like it had snowed a little, which wasn't surprising. There were warnings of an upcoming snowstorm. I think it ended up dumping 2 or 3 feet that night. On my way back from the trash, I circled down into the basement where the overstocked refrigerator was, along with the cups and lids and stuff. I pulled 3 milks from the fridge and reached for a 4th. I'd perfected a carrying method, but it was precarious. As I managed to grab the final gallon with one finger, I heard this weird sound from deeper in the basement. We never went on that side of the basement. In fact, there was an unfinished wall that blocked off a good 2/3 of it all. We'd been told not to go over there because flood damage had exposed old pipes and they didn't want us to get tetanus or something. It sounded like trickling water, and when I play it back in my mind even now, there's this faint laughter somewhere in the mix. It wasn't even creepy. It sounded like a normal laugh. But there shouldn't have been someone in the basement laughing. That was the creepy part. I stood there for who knows how long, probably only a few seconds, before turning to go back upstairs. The sound had stopped and I tried to convince myself, that maybe I'd imagined it. I was halfway up the stairs, my attention focused on trying to balance the 4 gallons of milk. I was out of practice since I hadn't had a shift for a couple of weeks. I lost hold of a container and it fell, bouncing on the steps as it broke open and gushed milk down the entire stairwell. I heard someone say, "Ow," as the milk hit the ground at the bottom of the stairs behind me. I kid you not. That was enough for me. I didn't want to meet whoever was chilling in the basement having a laugh. It was downtown Seattle, so there was always the possibility of random people around. I ran the rest of the way up the stairs and slammed the door behind me, double locking it. I had never understood why there was a lock on that door to begin with, but thinking back, maybe there was a reason. Tossed the milks in the fridge under the counter. I saw that Anna Marie had already left with the night deposit, so I clocked out and grabbed my jacket and stuff and headed out the back door to the alley. Walked up to that bus stop on 2nd and Lenora and went home. I didn't have another shift for a couple of days, so I started to forget what had happened in the basement. But a few days later, I had a last-minute opening shift filling in for another barista who was stuck at the airport in Detroit. I got off the bus and made my way carefully down the hill. The snow had stuck around. The shop had actually been closed since my last shift because of that big snowstorm. As I rounded the corner to the front of the shop, I remembered that I hadn't cleaned up the milk spill and how awful that was going to be after it had been sitting there for half a week. We were on a side street, so the snowplow hadn't come by yet. I stepped wrong and tripped face first into a pile of snow. Dug through with my foot to see what I'd tripped over. Turned out to be the zippered bag from the night deposit. It was locked and still had money in it, but not very much. There hadn't been that many customers. Got to the front and saw there was glass everywhere on the street mixed in with the snow. The windows were totally shattered and the door was kind of smashed up. I was more than nervous at that point and yelled into the shop to see if anyone was inside. Didn't get a response. I crept inside. The door was only attached with one hinge, so I had to pick it up and set it aside. The snow had blown in and frozen to the tiled floor. Coffee beans were everywhere and the machines were ripped apart. Tables and chairs were thrown around. I looked back through the smashed windows and could see a couple of chairs on the other side of the street, half buried in the snow. The basement door, I swear to God I had locked it, was standing open. The doorknob was twisted off and the bolts splintered out. I clicked on the light, and all the way down the stairwell, there were streaks of this weird, sparkly slime on the walls and steps, which mixed into the frozen puddle of milk at the bottom. I don't know why, but I touched the slime. It stuck to my hand, and there was a gritty texture. It reminded me of when my dad had forced me to gut a fish, and the scales had gotten everywhere. It was the same consistency. I went further downstairs. The unfinished wall had been pushed over, and there was a giant hole in the wall with pipes bent in every direction. I ran back upstairs and called Anna Marie to see if she was okay. She answered her phone and told me that when she went to deposit the cash, someone had hit her from behind, and she woke up face first in the snow about 30 minutes later. She said she was so disoriented that her boyfriend came and picked her up. She didn't notice any of the windows being broken at that point. I hung up with her and called my boss, who had been in Punta Cana for the last week, and told him what was going on. Fast forward a few weeks. The police investigated, and it looked like the perpetrator came in through that wall. But what in the hell would have the strength to break down a concrete wall? The shop is back open now after the owner filed an insurance claim. But I quit a week after that incident, especially after what happened to Anna Marie. I grew up in West Virginia. This happened a few years ago when I went home to visit. I live in Ohio now, but I was raised in the Little Kanawha River Basin. I did most of my hunting near Orlando. Great spot for coon hunting. So I was home in the fall that year. I think it was around Thanksgiving. Since I was visiting, I didn't have my dogs with me, but my brother Ted hunts too. Kinda runs in the family. We had planned to hunt together that night, but he and his girl had gotten in a spat and all he wanted to do was sit home and mope. I couldn't convince him to come out with me, but he told me just to take the dogs out myself. So I did. Now Ted's got blue ticks, a pair of them, named Nate and Jonesy. Myself, I keep Walker hounds, but everyone has their favorites. Nate and Jonesy were pretty excited to load up. You know, it's funny. Dogs always know when you're taking them out for a hunt. There's a spot on Oil Creek where I usually park and let the boys out. It's best if you let them run a bit to get it out of their system. A good hound knows when it's time to quit playing. Ted's dogs are well trained too. As soon as I whistled and started walking down the river trail, they got down to business. After a couple of false leads, suddenly Jonesy gets the scent and starts baying. I gave him his head and he took off with Nate on his heels. I heard them tree something up ahead and thought, boy, that didn't take long. It was a clear night with a good moon, and sometimes that brings good luck. I mean, probably it's just that the coons are more active or something. But I always do better when the moon's bright. I got to where they were, practically trying to climb that damn tree themselves, and told them to stand down. I shined my light up in the branches and didn't see a thing. I was surprised because this didn't seem like a false lead the way they were carrying on. So I keep shining, walking around the tree, thinking there had to be a coon up in there somewhere. And that's when I saw it. Damn creepiest thing I've ever seen. My light caught the edge of this black, leathery wing, kind of like a bat's wing, only it was huge. I mean, it had to have been 4.5 feet long, maybe 2 feet wide. Seriously, I didn't even understand what I was seeing at first, but it had those, ribs. Those things that divide the wing into sections, like a bat's wing has. I was so startled, I almost dropped my light. I think I might have said holy crap or something, and then the wing moved, and I saw the rest of it. Okay, this is the crazy part. It looked like a human's body, but smoother. I mean, it had a head and a torso and legs, not like a bird. It was all one color except for the wings, like medium gray. I couldn't see its feet, but its head was small in proportion to its body. It must have been scared because the head was tucked down to the chest like it was hiding. At this point, the dogs are getting restless and starting to whine. I snapped out a command to hush, and that's when the thing looked up. Total freak show. Its face was pale gray, almost white, and it was blank. I guess that's the best way to describe it. I was shining the light right on that sucker, and I'm telling you, it didn't have any features like a nose or a mouth, just eyes. The eyes were small and glowing red, like those toy bats they sell at Halloween where the eyes light up when you flip a switch. Okay, so I took a shot at it. I was acting on pure instinct. The creature was so damn unnatural, and I admit, I was kinda nervous. I didn't know what the hell it was going to do, so I raised my rifle and took a shot. I must have missed. I say must have because the thing took off, just leapt out of the tree and sailed away in the night. I tried to follow it with my flashlight, and that beam's pretty strong, but I couldn't track it. It was gone. I don't know how I missed it. I was right below it, maybe 18 feet away tops. Should have been an easy shot. I came back the next day and looked around in the daylight for some sign of it, feathers or weird blood or something. I didn't find anything. I told my brother Ted about it, and he just laughed at me. Asked if I'd been drinking. He can be an ass sometimes, but I know what I saw, and I'm not afraid to talk about it. I've told a few other hunters I know, and you know, hunters see a lot of strange stuff out there when the rest of the world is asleep. Then, last winter, I was talking to a guy trading hunting stories when I brought up seeing a creature in West Virginia that looked like a giant bat human. He told me about the Mothman. Turns out his brother-in-law had a similar story, hunting in Pennsylvania. He said the poor guy was so freaked out seeing that thing up in a tree by the swamp that he turned tail and ran. Made me feel good, not just that someone else had seen the same thing, but also that I was brave enough to try and take it down. As a park ranger, I've had quite a few experiences that make me question everything I know. We're not alone out there, and there is life after death. I could go on and on about every experience I've had, but I'll tell you about a recent one that seriously freaked me out. I was instructed to remove this invasive plant species that was wreaking havoc on our native foliage. I was deep in the woods digging up the roots of this damn weed when I heard a loud cry in the distance. Hearing animal noises certainly isn't uncommon, so I didn't pay it much mind at first, but the more I heard it, the more it sounded like a wounded puppy crying for help. I got to the point where I couldn't ignore it anymore, and I just had to rescue this poor little creature. I kept hiking in the direction I heard the cries. It took me far into the forest off the paths that I'm familiar with, and I kept walking deep into the woods towards the sound. I eventually wandered into an Awanichi camp, and I started asking if there was a wounded animal around. Nobody knew of any, so I just kept searching. Finally, a man asked me what it sounded like, and I explained it sounded like a wounded puppy. I explained that I'd been searching for well over an hour, and it sounds like the puppy is just around the corner, but I can't find it anywhere. He had me sit down and he gave me this delicious concoction to drink. He told me that the sound I was hearing was not a dog. It was a sound that he's heard several times before. He told me that several years earlier, a boy had drowned in a lake nearby. Ever since then, his ghost has haunted the lake and has become a deathly presence. Once an innocent boy crying for help, now he cries to lure people to him. When people reach out to help him get out of the lake, the boy grabs them by their legs and pulls them underwater to drown them to death. Being skeptical, I explained to the man that it wasn't a boy's cries I heard, it was a wounded puppy crying for help. The man was persistent and he insisted that I should never trust the boy. He said that everyone who has ever gone to the lake to help the boy has died, and if he was calling to me, that meant that I was next. I didn't believe it for a second and was getting frustrated by this point. I just went hours out of my way to help an animal, and it wasn't about to be in vain. Suddenly, I heard the cry again. "See? That's the sound I've been hearing," I shouted. The man just shook his head. "I've heard that cry many times in my lifetime. I've lost many people to that cry. All I can do is warn you. It's up to you to do what's best for you." The man walked away, and I was left with a choice. Do I listen to some fairy tale and let a helpless animal die? Or do I go rescue it so I can get back to dealing with the weeds? I followed the cry for another 15 minutes or so, and sure enough, I ended up at the lake. It was gorgeous, located right between two mountains. There are some incredible sights at Yosemite National Park. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen in my life. There were trees surrounding the lake and endless mountain views as far as the eye could see in every direction. Finally, I heard the cry crystal clear, but this time it sounded different. There was a strange element to the cry. It was almost like whatever was crying was trying to hold back laughter. I looked around and there wasn't any creature that I could see. The sound kept getting louder and louder, and I panicked. I thought about everything the man had said, and the sound I heard wasn't a cry for help. Clearly, something was toying with me. Something evil. I turned around and ran as fast as I could. I was terrified. I could still hear the laughter in the distance as I sprinted back towards the Ahuanichi camp. I finally made it, and I told the man I spoke to earlier everything that happened to me. He told me, if you ever hear the cry again, ignore it, and do whatever you can to get it out of your mind. The boy preys on your compassion and fear, and if you let him, he will drive you to drown in the lake just to escape the torment in your mind. I told a fellow park ranger about this, and he told me of a legend called the Grouse Lake Ghost. People hear his cries and then end up drowning in the lake. This freaked me out that it was a known phenomenon, and I thought about how close I got to the lake. I must say, the lake is absolutely gorgeous, and it is something everyone should see before they die. But for God's sake, if you hear crying or laughing, get the hell out of there.